I grew up in a town that preferred not to look too closely at anything. Folks kept their lawns trimmed, their curtains drawn, and their mouths shut. Outsiders used to say it felt like we were a little too polite, a little too quiet, but to me it just felt like home. I only started to notice the silence for what it really was when I got older. The first time I ever heard the word census taker, I was maybe 10 years old. My uncle had been drinking at the bar on Main and came home late, slamming doors and muttering under his breath. I pretended to be asleep on the couch, eyes half closed, as he dropped into the recliner. He leaned toward my father and said, 10 years, like clockwork, he comes, and people don't even fight it anymore. My father gave him a sharp look and jerked his chin at me. My uncle fell quiet. I didn't ask questions, not then, but the words stuck. I thought he meant the real census. Men in suits with clipboards, knocking door to door, tallying up names. I even asked about it once at school, and the teacher gave me a funny look before saying, "That's not something you need to worry about." She moved on so quickly I almost believed I'd said something wrong. It didn't really click until years later, when I came back from college. By then I'd started to notice the pattern of absences. You don't notice right away. People move, people die, that's normal. But here, there was another kind of loss, quiet, bloodless, and absolute. Someone would be there one day and gone the next, and nobody else seemed to remember they'd ever existed. The house down the street would still have cars in the driveway, lights in the windows, kids playing out front. But if there had been 4 yesterday, there were 3 today, and everyone acted like it had always been 3. Except me. I remembered. It was early March when I started paying closer attention. I was walking home from the corner store with a sack of groceries when I saw old Mrs. Hanlon sitting on her porch. She never spoke much, just rocked in her chair and stared at the street. But that night, as I passed, she called out to me in a voice like paper tearing. "He's back." I stopped, the plastic bag digging into my palm. "What?" Her cloudy eyes locked on mine. "Census taker came last night." Before I could ask anything else, she turned her face away. The next morning, her porch was empty. A sheriff's cruiser was parked out front, and her son stood in the yard shaking hands with a deputy. When I asked a neighbor later, they said her time came and left it at that. But I remembered something they didn't. She hadn't been living alone. Her daughter, a woman in her 30s, had moved in years ago to care for her. I'd seen her at the grocery store, exchanged hellos at the gas pump. She was gone. No one else remembered she'd ever existed. That night I sat awake at my window with the lights off, staring at the street. It was quiet for hours. Then, just after 1, I heard it. 3 soft knocks, patient and deliberate. Not at my house, farther down. I strained to listen, pressing my ear to the glass. 3 more knocks. Silence stretched, then the faintest murmur of voices. My blood went cold. I stayed there until dawn, eyes burning, waiting for something else to happen. When morning came, the street looked unchanged. Kids got on the bus, parents went to work. But I noticed a change in the Wilsons' yard. 2 bikes leaned against the porch instead of 3. I waited by the window all day, watching. Their teenage son didn't come out. When I asked another neighbor about him, they gave me a puzzled look and said, "They've only ever had 2. I felt dizzy. That night I sat in the dark again, waiting. The knock came closer this time, 2 houses over. I heard the door creak open, muffled voices, the steady rhythm of question and answer. The next morning, the barbershop downtown was dark. The old man who'd cut my hair since I was a kid was gone. The windows dusted over like the place had been abandoned for years. People swore it had. But I remembered sitting in his chair last month, remembered the click of scissors and the smell of talcum powder. I started carrying a small notebook, hiding it in different places each day. At the top of the first page I wrote, "Hanlon's daughter, gone March 3. Beneath it, Wilson boy, gone March 7. Barber, gone March 9th. The act of writing steadied me, even as it made my hand shake. When I tried to talk to my father, he shut me down. We were in the garage, him oiling his shotgun, me leaning against the workbench. I told him about the knocks, about the disappearances. He set the gun aside, looked me in the eye, and said flatly, Don't what? I asked. Don't ask. Don't notice. Don't talk. His voice didn't rise, but something in his tone stopped me cold. That was the first time it occurred to me he might have heard the knock himself long ago. After that, I watched the street every night. The sound came again and again, steady as a metronome, moving from one house to the next. Each time someone disappeared. Each time no one remembered but me. I tried to warn people. At the diner, I asked one of the bus drivers about the teenager next door. He stared at me blankly and said, There's never been a kid living there. At the market, I asked Mrs. Wilson about her youngest. She tilted her head and frowned. What boy? That was when I knew it wasn't just loss, it was erasure. The next knock came so close I could feel it in my bones, right next door, through the wall. I pressed my ear to the plaster, heart hammering, knuckles against wood, steady and patient. A pause, then the voice. It wasn't sound. It wasn't anything I could have heard with my ears. It slid straight into my head, calm and detached. How many live here? I staggered back from the wall, pressing both hands over my ears, though it made no difference. My neighbor's voice answered, muffled, resigned. The silence that followed was worse than the question. By morning, the toys that had always littered their porch were gone. The laughter of their youngest was gone. The family carried on as if nothing had changed. I added another line to the notebook, my handwriting barely legible through the tremor in my hands. That night, I didn't sit by the window. I crouched in the hallway with every light off, listening, waiting, counting the seconds between each distant knock. When it finally came again, 3 soft raps, deliberate and unhurried. It was no longer somewhere else. It was at my door. The knock rattled through me, soft as it was. 3 steady taps, spaced just enough apart that each one made my heart jolt in my chest. I crouched in the hallway, knees digging into the floorboards, every breath burning my throat. Another 3 came. The dresser pressed against the door barely shivered with the force of it. He wasn't pounding. He wasn't trying to force his way in. He was waiting. Silence followed, stretched so long I thought maybe he'd gone. Then came the voice, slithering into my skull without ever passing through my ears. How many live here? I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. My chest rose and fell so violently I thought the sound alone would betray me. How many live here? I pressed my palms harder over my ears. It didn't matter. The words were inside me, patient and calm, as if I had all the time in the world to answer. I didn't. I stayed there, curled against the wall, until dawn light seeped through the blinds. The voice never came again, but the silence pressed down just as heavy. When I finally moved, my legs shook so badly I could barely stand. The dresser still blocked the door. There was no mark, no sign of anyone outside, just the ordinary creak of morning, except upstairs. Through the thin ceiling I heard muffled sobs. Mrs. Keene, the widow with the little terrier. The dog barked at everything, mailmen, thunder, me shuffling down the hall. Now there was only silence. I climbed the steps slowly, each creak of wood echoing in my skull. I stopped outside her door, hand hovering above the frame. The sobbing had gone quiet. The leash that always hung by the door was gone. I backed away. By afternoon, when I passed her door again, the apartment was silent. No barking, no weeping. I asked another neighbor about the dog, desperate for someone to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. They blinked at me, puzzled. What dog? I almost screamed at them. Instead, I went home, shut myself inside, and pulled out the notebook. Keene's dog, gone after March 12. The words blurred under my shaking hand. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat with my back against the wall, knees hugged to my chest, waiting. Every sound in the building felt amplified, the radiator groaning, pipes rattling, the soft shift of wood. Around 1, I heard it again. Not at my door this time, down the block. 3 knocks, then silence, then voices. I crept to the window, easing the blinds open just enough. A porch light flickered on 2 houses down. I could see the outline of a man in the doorway, shoulders rigid, lips moving in low answers. I pressed my forehead against the glass, whispering, "Don't answer him." But of course, he couldn't hear me. The door closed. The light clicked off. Upstairs, a curtain shifted, and where there had been 3 silhouettes a moment before, there were 2. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My legs gave out, and I sat hard on the floor, gasping like I'd run miles. The following day at the hardware store, I dropped a whole box of screws when a customer tapped me on the shoulder. My nerves were shot, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The manager pulled me aside and asked if I was sick. I lied and said I hadn't been sleeping. He didn't press. Nobody presses in this town. That night I drove across town to the retirement home. I hadn't visited in years, but my great aunt was still there. As a child, I'd overheard my grandmother once whisper that my aunt had been touched by the census taker. At the time, I hadn't understood. Now it was the only lead I had. I found her in the common room, staring at a muted television, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. When she saw me, her eyes sharpened. "You've heard him," she said softly. The hair on my arms prickled. "You remember, I never forgot." Her voice cracked on the last word. "He came when I was 12. My mother opened the door," she answered. "I had 4 sisters. The next morning there were 3. No one remembered the 4th, not even my father. But I did." I sank into the chair across from her, notebook heavy in my pocket. "What did he look like?" She shivered, her gaze distant. "That's the worst part. I saw him with my own eyes, standing there in the doorway, but I couldn't tell you what he looked like if my life depended on it." My eyes slid right off him, like trying to stare at smoke. But the voice, you never forget the voice. Her words matched exactly what I'd felt, the cold, invasive calm inside my head. "Why do we remember?" I asked. Her hand trembled as she reached for her teacup. "I don't know. Maybe we're cursed with it. Maybe he chooses some of us to carry it forward. But listen to me. Don't answer him. Whatever you do, don't answer." I leaned closer. "What happens if you don't?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Then someone else pays." The words sat between us like a weight. I couldn't stay. I drove home with the radio, turned low, hands locked tight on the wheel. The streets were empty, houses dark, the whole town asleep, or pretending to be. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my heart was thudding so hard it hurt. I sat in the car with the engine off, staring at my darkened windows, forcing myself to breathe. When I finally stepped inside, I left every light off. The dresser was still pressed against the door, the chair wedged under the knob. I slid down against the wall, notebook open in my lap, pen hovering above the page. The knocks came just after 1, 3 of them, soft and steady. This time, they weren't down the street. They weren't next door. They were at my door again. I froze, pen slipping from my fingers, rolling across the floor. The voice seeped into me, calm and patient. "How many live here?" My throat tightened. I pressed both hands to my mouth. "How many live here?" The words pulsed inside my skull, unhurried, certain, waiting for me to break. The dresser shuddered as another 3 knocks landed, perfectly spaced. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, just as sudden as it had begun, the silence returned. I stayed crouched there, muscles locked, until pale light seeped through the blinds. My whole body trembled, teeth chattering though the air wasn't cold. When I finally forced myself up, I checked the hallway. The building was silent, doors shut, everything normal, until I heard it. A single sob, thin, broken, from somewhere upstairs. Mrs. Keene's door was closed, the hall empty. I stood there, my stomach sinking, knowing exactly what I would find if I opened it. I didn't. I went back inside, shut the door, and wrote 1 more line in the notebook, my hand shaking so hard the letters were nearly illegible. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. I tried, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of the voice waiting for me, pressing against the edges of my skull. The silence in the apartment building was unbearable. No dog barking, no footsteps overhead, just emptiness where life had been. On the 3rd night, exhaustion forced me under. and I woke up at dawn with the notebook pressed to my chest. My first thought was that something else had vanished, that my father or the whole building would be gone, but the street outside looked the same. Neighbors watered their lawns. Kids shouted on the way to school. The difference was subtle. The difference was always subtle. I counted cars and driveways as I walked to the store. There were fewer. 2 down the block, 1 at the corner. It was like the town itself was thinning, slowly being trimmed back. Nobody else seemed to see it. At the diner that afternoon, I slid into a booth across from Mr. Finch. He sat hunched over his coffee, his hands trembling as he stirred sugar into it. I'd heard him mutter once before, years back, about the knock. I didn't know who else I could talk to. "You remember him?" I said quietly. His spoon clinked against the cup. His eyes flicked up, watery but sharp. "You shouldn't say that," he whispered. "I've already heard him. Twice." I didn't answer. His hand shook harder, coffee sloshing. "Then you know. You know what happens." I leaned in. "Why don't people fight back?" He stared into his cup for a long moment. "They did. Once, long time ago. Boarded up doors, prayed, even tried leaving town. Didn't make a lick of difference. He always comes. And when he does, someone's gone. Fighting just makes it worse." I swallowed hard. "Worse how?" He finally met my eyes, and I saw something hollow there, a wound that had never closed. He came to my family's door in '62. My father opened it, stood tall like he could stop him. Told him 4 lived here. The next morning we were 3. My brother was gone, but my father, his voice cracked. My father looked right at me when I asked where he'd gone and said, "What brother?" My stomach turned. "But you still remember. Some of us do." He set the spoon down with a clatter. "That's the curse, carrying the weight of everyone who's been taken, knowing the rest of the world's been scrubbed clean." I wanted to ask more, but he shut down after that, lips pressed tight, gaze fixed on the wall behind me. I didn't push him. That night I sat at my window again, notebook open on my knees. The pages were filling fast, dates, addresses, tallies of who was gone. Sometimes I could remember names, faces, little details. Other times it was just shapes I knew had existed but couldn't quite grasp. The knock came just after 1. 3 soft raps, steady and patient. I slid lower, heart hammering, careful not to disturb the blinds. The porch light across the street flicked on. The father stepped into the glow, his shoulders hunched, his hand white-knuckled on the doorframe. He answered questions I couldn't hear. Upstairs, in the second-floor window, 3 shadows shifted. Children. I held my breath as the father nodded once, twice, and then, like a film skipping a frame, there were 2. No scream, no cry, just absence. My hand shot to my mouth. My notebook slid from my lap to the floor with a soft thud. I pressed my forehead against the glass, tears stinging my eyes, watching the family move back into darkness as if nothing had changed. I stayed there until dawn, the image of that vanished silhouette burning into me. The next morning, the children played in the yard, 2 of them. Their mother called to them from the porch. Their father waved at a passing neighbor, smiling, whole. There should have been 3. I wrote it down, hand trembling. At the market later, I asked the mother how the kids were doing. She blinked at me, confused. "What kids?" she said. Then her face softened. "Oh, you mean my 2?" My throat closed. I nodded mutely and turned away before I could choke. "Back home," I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Don't talk about it on the phone," he said before I could even begin. I gripped the receiver tighter. "You know, don't you? Don't." His tone cut sharp, final, then the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, chest heaving, rage boiling over the fear. Everyone else could bury their heads in the sand, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. That night I positioned myself differently, not by the window, not crouched in the hallway. I pulled on a coat, stepped out into the cold, and crossed the street. I tucked myself into the shadow of a hedgerow, notebook clutched tight. I was going to see him. The hours dragged. My breath fogged in the air, my teeth chattered, but I stayed still. And then, 3 knocks. Not at my house this time. 2 doors down. I held my breath, heart hammering against my ribs. The porch light snapped on. The door opened. The father stood framed in yellow glow, shoulders stiff, face pale, and there he was, a census taker. At first I thought my eyes had blurred from the cold. His outline shimmered, indistinct, like heat rising from pavement. My gaze slid off him every time I tried to fix on a detail. He was tall, that much I knew, but nothing else would hold. The father's lips moved, answers I couldn't hear. My stomach lurched. Behind him, in the window, upstairs, 3 silhouettes shifted. I blinked, and there were 2. My pen dug into the paper, scratching the word witness so deep it nearly tore the page. The door closed. The porch light went out. I sat in the dark, every muscle rigid, watching until dawn. The image of him stuck in my head for days, a tall outline, impossible to hold in focus, like trying to stare at smoke or heat shimmer. My eyes slid off him no matter how hard I tried. Even when I closed them, he lingered there, burned into the backs of my eyelids. I told myself I would stay inside from now on, but by the next night I was at the window again. I couldn't stop myself. Curiosity had its claws in me as deep as the fear. The knocks came at once sharp on the dot. 3 soft raps. Not at my door this time, but not far. Each sound rattled through me like it was inside my chest. The porch light flicked on at a house farther down. The door opened. A mother answered, her shoulders stiff, lips trembling. Her answers were quick, clipped, then silence. I didn't even need to look at the windows to know. One less. I slammed the blinds shut and pressed my back against the wall, sliding to the floor. The next morning, I tried to test myself. I stood outside their house, pretending to check my phone, watching the yard. 2 children played on the grass, rolling a ball back and forth. There had been 3. I remembered. I always remembered. But when the mother glanced at me, she smiled as if nothing had ever been different. I went home sick. That evening, I started dragging furniture. The dresser stayed jammed against the front door, the chair wedged under the knob. I pushed the couch to cover the back door, shoved a bookcase in front of the kitchen entrance. It wouldn't stop him, but I needed the illusion of safety. I sat in the middle of the room, notebook on my lap, pen in hand, waiting. The knock came at 1 again. My blood turned to ice. 3 raps, soft and patient, vibrating through the wood, rattling through the furniture. I didn't move. The voice followed, calm and cold, bleeding into my skull. How many live here? My lips trembled against my hand. I pressed harder, biting down until blood welled in my mouth. How many live here? The sound stretched and echoed inside me, unhurried, certain, patient. The dresser gave a faint groan as though something pressed against the door. Then silence. I stayed frozen until dawn, my notebook still blank in my lap. When I finally staggered to the hallway, I heard it again, a muffled sob from above. Mrs. Keene's apartment was empty now, not just her dog, her. The door was ajar. I pushed it open with trembling fingers. The rooms inside were stripped bare. No furniture, no clothes, no photographs. Just blank space like no one had ever lived there. I stumbled back into the hall, bile burning the back of my throat. By afternoon, the unit was listed on the board in the lobby, available for rent. That night, I sat with my ear to the wall, unable to stop myself. I heard the knock again, 2 houses over, the murmur of voices, steady as ever, and then the absence. It was coming closer, 1 house at a time. I started making mistakes. At the hardware store, I dropped a whole box of nails when a customer asked me a question. At the diner, the waitress called me by name and I couldn't remember hers, even though I'd known her since childhood. I wrote it down in the notebook the second I got home, terrified she might vanish and take my memory with her. By the end of the week, the notebook was filling fast, page after page of names, dates, houses, tallies. Some entries were just fragments, Boy at the park, gone March 15th, or old woman with shopping cart, gone March 16th. Every time I wrote, my hand shook harder. I started sleeping with it clutched to my chest. The knocks came every night, always at 1, always steady. The sound drew closer and closer, eating its way down the block. Each morning there were fewer cars in driveways, fewer children on bikes, fewer faces at the diner. And no one else noticed. One night, I tried something different. I left my apartment and crouched in the bushes outside, heart hammering, determined to watch again. The knock came at the house across the street. The porch light flicked on. The door opened. The census taker stood in the glow. His outline wavered, impossible to hold in focus. The father stood rigid, nodding, lips moving with answers. I felt the words bleed into me even from where I crouched. "How many live here?" The father's voice was faint. Five. How many live here?" 5. Silence stretched. The porch light flickered. Upstairs, 5 silhouettes moved in the window. I blinked, and there were 4. My stomach twisted. I doubled over in the bushes, hands pressed to my mouth, trying not to retch. When I looked up again, the door had closed. The porch light was out. The street was dark. I crawled back to my apartment on shaking hands and knees, clutching the notebook to my chest. The next morning, their family waved to neighbors as if nothing had changed. 4 children laughed and chased each other in the yard. No one remembered the 5th. I added another line to the notebook, hand trembling so badly the letters were jagged. That night, I didn't move from the couch. I sat in the dark with the notebook open, staring at the door, waiting. The knock came again. This time, it was mine. The first 3 knocks landed so softly that for a heartbeat, I thought it might have been my imagination. The dresser rattled faintly against the wood. Then 3 more. I sat rigid on the couch, notebook clutched tight in my lap, every muscle in my body locked. The voice seeped in, smooth and calm, as if spoken directly into my skull. "How many live here?" My lips parted, but no sound came. My tongue felt nailed to the roof of my mouth. "How many live here?" The question pulsed inside me, steady and patient, not loud but inescapable. I slid lower, gripping the notebook so hard the edges cut into my palms. My breath came shallow and ragged, each inhale burning. I bit down hard enough on my tongue to taste blood, terrified some involuntary gasp would give me away. The knock came again, 3 precise taps, unhurried, inevitable. The dresser shuddered slightly. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the sound of the knob turning, for the door to crash open. Nothing came. Silence stretched. My pulse roared in my ears, then the voice again, calm as ever. "How many live here?" I pressed both palms flat over my mouth, my throat convulsed with the need to breathe, the need to scream. The silence grew thick, suffocating. Then the pressure lifted. I stayed there on the floor, shivering so violently I thought my teeth would crack, until faint morning light began to push its way through the blinds. When I finally forced myself upright, the dresser still pressed tight against the door. No mark on the wood, no sign anyone had been there, except there was. From upstairs came a low, broken sob. I staggered into the hall, legs weak, climbing 1 step at a time. The sobbing grew clearer, thin, despairing, cracking with grief. "Mrs. Keene." Her door was shut tight. I pressed my ear to the wood. No barking, no sound of claws on the floor. Just her voice, whispering names I didn't recognize, names she would forget by morning. I backed away, bile burning the back of my throat. By afternoon, the apartment upstairs was silent. When I passed the door again, the leash peg was empty. A sign on the unit board in the lobby listed it as vacant. The dog was gone, and so was she. At the hardware store later that day, I fumbled a stack of receipts. The customer gave me a look of irritation, but when I asked if he remembered Mrs. Keene, he frowned. "Who?" "She lived upstairs from me," I insisted, voice too sharp. He shook his head, confused. "That place has been empty for years." I wanted to scream at him, but the words caught in my throat. That night, I sat in the dark again, notebook open, pen scratching furiously across the page. March 18, Mrs. Keene, gone. The letters looked foreign, jittering from the tremor in my hand. I tried to steady myself by writing more, every detail I could remember. Her glasses always sliding down her nose, the terrier tugging on the leash, the way she hummed hymns when she walked down the hall. The words smeared as tears blurred my vision. I dropped the pen and clutched the notebook to my chest, rocking in the dark. The knock came again, hours later. 3 soft raps, but not at my door, farther down the block. I crawled to the window and peeled the blinds back a fraction. The porch light flicked on across the street. The father answered again, shoulders stiff. His lips moved with quiet replies. Upstairs, silhouettes shifted, 2 children, then 1. I slammed the blinds shut, chest heaving, bile clawing up my throat. The notebook lay open on the table. I forced myself to scrawl another line, one less across the street. I sat there until dawn, every nerve raw, staring at the words until they swam. The next day, the street looked whole again. 2 parents, 1 child, smiles plastered across their faces as if nothing had changed. I walked past them with my hands shoved deep in my pockets, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. At the diner, I slid into a booth, trembling with exhaustion. Mr. Finch sat in his usual corner, stirring coffee with a shaking hand. I leaned across the table, voice low. He came to my door. Mr. Finch's spoon froze mid-stir. His eyes lifted to mine, sharp and watery. "You didn't answer," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, but someone else." My throat closed. "She's gone." His shoulders sagged. "That's the price." My hand curled into a fist on the table. "Why doesn't anyone else remember?" His laugh was dry, cracked. "They're not meant to. You are. That's your curse now." I wanted to demand more, but he turned his face away, shutting me out. That night, the knock came again. 3 soft raps, not at my door, but close, always closer. I crouched by the window, every muscle taut, watching, waiting, unable to look away. The porch light across the street flicked on. The door opened. The father answered, his shoulders stiff, his lips moving. The voice seeped into me even from across the road. "How many live here?" he answered. And 1 more was gone. I couldn't stand it anymore, sitting in the dark, waiting for the sound, clutching my notebook while another family was trimmed down. I told myself I wouldn't go out again, that watching only made it worse, but when the clock neared, when I found myself slipping into my coat. The air outside was sharp, cutting at my lungs. The street lay hushed under a thin veil of moonlight, every house dark and still. I crouched in the shadows at the end of the block, notebook tucked under my arm, pen gripped tight, every nerve stretched thin. The knock came, 3 raps, soft and patient. The sound carried in the night like it was meant for me. A porch light flickered on halfway down the street. The door opened, spilling pale glow onto the front walk. A man stood framed in the light, shoulders hunched. His lips moved, answering questions, and there he was again. The census taker, closer than I had ever seen him. He stood in the wash of light, tall, indistinct, impossible to hold in focus. My eyes slid off his outline, blurred at the edges. It was like trying to stare through rippling water. But the longer I looked, the more my stomach turned. There was a weight to him, a pressure in the air that made every instinct scream to run. I pressed the pen into the notebook and scrawled, saw him again. Tall, can't see his face. The words shook with my trembling hand. The voice seeped into me, smooth as ever, though I stood across the street. "How many live here?" The man's voice was faint. 4. "How many live here?" 4. Silence stretched. In the window above, 4 shadows shifted. I blinked and there were 3. No scream, no sound, just absence. My pen dug so deep it tore the paper. My throat burned as bile clawed its way up, and I doubled over, retching into the bushes. When I looked up again, the porch light was out. The street was dark. The man closed the door and disappeared inside. The house looked the same, whole, normal, but I had seen it. By morning, they were 3. The family laughed on the porch, waved to neighbors, carried on like nothing had happened. Nobody else noticed the missing shadow in the upstairs window. I wrote it down, but my hand barely worked. The letters leaned jagged and uneven across the page. That afternoon, I sat on a bench downtown, staring at the people drifting past. Shoppers, clerks, mothers tugging children along by the wrist. How many of them had been trimmed down already? How many holes in reality was I standing in the middle of? I tried to talk to one of the mothers outside the grocery store. "You had 3 kids," I said. "Last week, you had 3. She frowned, shifting the toddler on her hip. "I've only ever had 2. Her eyes slid past me, already disinterested. I stepped back, stomach hollow. That night, I followed again. The knocks came at 1. 3 raps, a door opened. The figure stood in the light. A woman answered, her shoulders stiff, her lips trembling. I watched the upstairs window. 2 silhouettes, then 1. The notebook page blurred as I tried to write, the letters shaking across the paper. The door closed. The street was dark again. I crouched in the bushes until dawn, my body frozen with cold, my breath misting the air. The next day, the house looked whole again. 1 child instead of 2, but no one else saw the gap. At the diner, I sat across from Mr. Finch again, my notebook open between us. The pages were filled, every line a record of absence. "You can't stop him," he said quietly. "You'll drive yourself mad trying." I gripped the pen so hard my knuckles went white. "Then what's the point of me remembering? Why me?" His eyes glistened. "Maybe that's his cruelty. Somebody has to carry it. Somebody has to watch." I slammed the notebook shut, the sound too loud in the quiet diner. Heads turned. I slid out of the booth and left without looking back. That night, I was back at the window. The knock came. This time, I didn't just watch. I stepped outside. The air was brittle cold, each breath sharp. I crossed the street and crouched in the hedges, my whole body shivering with terror. The porch light flared. The door opened, and there he was, not 20 feet away, the census taker. His presence pressed against me like weight on my chest, making each breath shallow. My eyes wouldn't focus. His outline shifted and blurred, edges fraying, but I couldn't look away. The father's lips moved with answers I couldn't hear. The voice seeped into me, calm and patient. "How many live here?" The father answered. Upstairs, silhouettes shifted. 2, then 1. The absence hit like a blow. The door shut. The porch light died. I stayed crouched in the hedges, every nerve alight, until the first streaks of dawn broke the horizon. My legs gave out beneath me as I stumbled home, clutching the notebook tight to my chest. Inside, I collapsed onto the floor, flipping to the next blank page. My hand shook as I wrote the words. I saw him up close. He knows I'm watching. The entry in the notebook stared back at me all day. He knows I'm watching. The words felt heavier than the paper could hold. Every time I glanced at them, it was like I'd scrawled my own death sentence. I couldn't let it just sit there. If no one else could remember, then I had to prove it somehow. Evidence. Something that wouldn't vanish when he came. That night I set up an old tape recorder by the door. I hadn't used it in years, but it still worked, the red light winking at me in the dark. I placed it on the floor against the wood and sat across the room with my notebook, waiting. At 1, the knock came. 3 soft raps, unhurried, patient. The tape reels spun, recording the silence that followed. Then the voice sliding into my skull, smooth as ever. How many live here? I flinched, pressing my palms over my ears. The words buzzed through bone, impossible to block. Another knock, another question. I stayed frozen, refusing to move, refusing to answer. Finally, the silence returned. The presence lifted. I let out a shuddering breath I didn't know I'd been holding and lunged for the recorder, stopping the reels. My hands shook as I rewound the tape and pressed play. Static hissed from the speaker. I leaned closer, straining to hear the knocks, the voice, anything. Nothing, just static. I rewound again, pressing my ear right against the machine. Still nothing but a hollow rush of noise like wind in a dead forest. My throat tightened. I smacked the side of the recorder, checked the reels, the wiring, the batteries, all fine. But the sound was gone, erased. I scribbled it in the notebook, furious lines tearing the paper, recording empty. Nothing but static. The next night I tried again, this time with a camcorder I borrowed from the hardware store's clearance shelf. I set it up at the window, angled toward the street, and hit record. The red light blinked steady, the tape spinning inside. At 1, the knocks came. 3 soft raps. A porch light flared across the street. The door opened. The figure stood there again, tall, blurred, edges shifting like smoke. I forced myself to hold still, to keep my eyes on him, to make sure the camera caught every second. My pulse hammered, my lungs burned, but I didn't look away until the door shut and the light went out. I scrambled for the camcorder, rewound, and pressed play. The tape showed the street, the house, the porch light flaring, the door opening, the man standing in the glow, shoulders stiff, and nothing else. The space where the census taker had stood was empty, just air. I rewound, played it again, watched frame by frame, always the same. The door opened, the man answered, the light flicked, and the space was blank. No shadow, no figure, just emptiness. I hurled the camcorder across the room. It shattered against the wall, pieces skittering across the floor. I dropped to my knees, clutching the notebook, scribbling furiously. He isn't there on tape. He erases himself, erases everything. The words looked jagged, wild. I tore through pages, filling line after line, desperate to anchor it all before it slipped. My hand cramped. The pen dug grooves into the paper, but I couldn't stop. By the time dawn bled through the blinds, my fingers were numb and my eyes burned. The notebook bulged with fresh entries, each one more frantic than the last. At work, I kept forgetting simple things, where I'd set the tape measure, what aisle the screws belonged to, which shelf I'd stocked the day before. The manager frowned at me, asked if I needed time off. I shook my head, muttering that I was fine. On my lunch break, I opened the notebook, needing to see the proof, to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Half the entries were gone. The ink had thinned, faded, vanished into the page. Blank lines stared back where names and dates had been. My heart slammed against my ribs. I flipped frantically, searching. Some words still clung faintly to the paper, gray ghosts of letters. Others were gone completely. I slammed it shut, clutching it to my chest, rocking in the break room until my shift ended. That night, I wrote each entry twice, once in the notebook, once on scraps of loose paper. I stuffed the scraps into my pockets, under couch cushions, inside the refrigerator. Anywhere I could think of. When the knock came, I crouched in the dark, clutching one of the scraps, whispering the words under my breath like a prayer. 3 knocks. The voice, steady and patient. How many live here? I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to answer, whispering the names I'd written over and over until the silence returned. By morning, half the scraps were blank. The notebook, too. Whole pages gone. Ink vanished as if it had never been there. My chest heaved. My vision swam. I tore the blank pages out and shredded them, scattering the pieces across the floor. I pressed the scraps that remained against my face, inhaling the ink, the paper, the proof. But even as I held them, the names blurred, softened, began to fade. I dropped them, clawing for my pen, scrawling new words across the last blank pages of the notebook. He erases not just people. He erases memory. He erases evidence. He erases everything. The letters jittered as my hand shook. I slammed the book shut, hugging it to my chest. Outside, the clock tower chimed midnight. 1, 2, 3. The knock came again. The next morning, I carried the notebook with me everywhere. I didn't care if people stared. I couldn't let it out of my sight. My pockets bulged with scraps of paper, each one filled with scrawled names, dates, little details of faces already fading. I read them constantly as I walked down Main, whispering them under my breath, terrified that if I stopped for even a second, they'd vanish. At the diner, I cornered Mrs. Wilson by the door. She froze with a takeout bag in her hands as I blocked her path. "You had 3 children," I said, shoving the notebook open under her nose. 3. I wrote it down. Her eyes flicked over the messy handwriting, then back to my face. Confusion rippled across her features, followed by pity. "You're mistaken," she said gently. "We've only ever had 2. I snapped the notebook shut so hard the sound made her flinch. "No, you're lying to yourself." Her face hardened. She stepped around me, clutching the bag tight, and left without another word. I turned on the next person I saw, a man I knew from the hardware store, someone I'd played baseball with as a kid. "Your brother," I demanded, grabbing his sleeve. "What happened to your brother?" His brow furrowed. "I don't have a brother. You did." My voice cracked. "You did." He pulled free, eyes narrowing, and walked off quickly without looking back. By the time I got home, my throat was raw from shouting. My neighbors in the building avoided my gaze, slipping into their apartments without a word. The air in the hallway was heavy, suffocating, like I'd crossed an invisible line. I pressed my back to my own door, clutching the notebook to my chest, trembling. The silence of the building closed in around me. That night, I couldn't stand to sit inside. I left the lights off and slipped into the cold. The air cut against my skin, sharp enough to sting. I crouched low in the shadows between hedges, eyes fixed on the street. The knock came at 1, 3 soft raps. The sound vibrated through me, low and steady, as inevitable as a heartbeat. The porch light flickered on at the corner house. The door opened. The figure stood framed in the glow, tall, indistinct, impossible to pin down. My gaze slid off him, no matter how hard I tried to focus. The father answered, shoulders hunched, lips moving. The voice seeped into me even across the street. "How many live here?" The father gave the number. In the window above, 2 shadows moved, then 1. I pressed a fist against my mouth, teeth digging into flesh to keep from making a sound. But the figure didn't turn away this time. He stilled. His blurred outline shifted in the light. Though his face refused to take shape, I felt it. Felt the weight of his attention slide across the yard, through the dark, pinning me where I crouched. The porch light flickered. The air thickened, heavy as water, pressing into my lungs. My vision swam. My fingers went numb. I curled into myself, shaking violently, clutching the notebook tight enough to crumple the cover. I bit my lip until it split, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. The door closed. The light went out. The weight lifted. I stayed frozen in the hedges for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, too terrified to breathe. When I finally staggered home, my whole body trembled with cold and fear. Inside, I threw the notebook open on the table and scrawled across the page in jagged letters. He saw me. I couldn't stop writing. Line after line, the words spilled, frantic, uncontrollable. He saw me. He saw me. He saw me. By dawn, my hand had cramped into a claw. I dropped the pen and slumped forward, face pressed to the paper, sweat slicking my skin. That afternoon, I forced myself out again. I needed air. I needed to see if anyone else felt it too. At the grocery store, I stopped a woman I knew from high school, her cart piled with boxes of cereal. "Do you hear it?" I demanded. "The knocking? At night?" Her brow furrowed. "What knocking? Don't lie to me. Don't you dare lie to me." She backed away, clutching the cart tighter. "You need help," she muttered, before hurrying down the aisle. I shouted after her, voice cracking. Heads turned, eyes darted away. I realized my hands were shaking so hard the notebook nearly slipped from my grasp. I fled the store. That night, I didn't dare sit by the window. I crouched in the corner of the living room, lights off, notebook hugged to my chest, waiting. The knock came at 1. 3 soft raps, this time closer. The porch light 2 doors down flared. The figure stood framed in the glow, and even through the walls of my apartment, I felt it. His attention sliding across the street, cutting through the dark, finding me where I hid. The knock landed harder this time. Not a polite rhythm, not soft or patient. 3 sharp raps that rattled the dresser against the door and sent dust raining from the frame. I jerked upright from the corner, notebook clutched tight against my chest. My breath tore in and out, ragged and shallow, every nerve on fire. Another 3 raps. The voice followed, heavy as stone, sliding into me like an iron weight. How many live here? I pressed my palms to my ears, pressed my knees tight against my chest, teeth grinding until my jaw ached. How many live here? My name followed. The sound of it inside my skull buckled me to the floor. Hearing him speak, it wasn't like anyone else saying it. It was stripped bare, hollow, as if the word itself had been carved out of the air and forced into me. I slapped both hands across my mouth, choking on a sob. The knock came again, harder. The dresser groaned as it scraped an inch across the floor. The chair wedged under the knob toppled with a crash. How many live here? My vision swam. The walls of the apartment wavered in the dark, angles bending wrong, shadows stretching thin and long across the floor. My own outline in the lamplight seemed to crawl, twitching a fraction behind my movements. I slammed my eyes shut, digging my nails into the cover of the notebook. If I didn't look, maybe it wouldn't unravel further. The knock shook the wood again, harder, faster, 3 in perfect rhythm, then 3 more, then 3 more. I pressed my face into my knees, breath tearing through my chest, the voice reverberating through bone and blood. And then silence, not quiet, silence. The refrigerator's hum cut off. The tick of the clock stopped. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, filling my throat until I couldn't swallow. My pulse thundered loud in the vacuum, each beat painful. The voice whispered my name again. I clutched the notebook tighter, rocking forward and back, muttering lines I'd written, anything to fill the void. March 3rd, Hanlon's daughter. March 7th, Wilson boy. March 9th, the barber. March 12th, Keen's dog. The dresser slid another inch, shrieking against the floor. My head snapped up. I stared at the wood, at the thin line of light seeping through the frame. The knob rattled once, twice, steady as a heartbeat. The voice slid inside me, smooth and inevitable. How many live here? I shoved myself backward, colliding with the far wall, breath tearing in my throat. The silence swelled until it filled the room like water. My ears rang, my eyes burned, my whole body screamed with the need to answer. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the pressure lifted. The refrigerator hummed back to life. The clock ticked again. The air lightened. I stayed frozen against the wall until the first pale streaks of dawn slipped through the blinds. When I finally forced myself up, my legs wobbled beneath me. The dresser sat crooked in front of the door, dragged inches from where I'd left it. The chair lay toppled on the floor. I staggered into the hallway, notebook clutched in my arms. The building was silent, too silent. I climbed the stairs one step at a time, heart pounding. The hallway above was empty, doors shut. I turned toward the unit across from Mrs. Keen's old apartment, the one where a family had lived for as long as I could remember. The door stood ajar. I pushed it open with shaking hands. Inside, the rooms were bare. No furniture, no clothes, no photographs, just pale walls and empty space. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping down the stairs. When I reached the street, the world was awake again. Cars drove past. Children shouted as they played. Neighbors waved as they carried groceries inside. But the building behind me felt gutted, hollow, wrong. I pressed the notebook open against my chest, scribbling with frantic strokes. He said my name. The walls bent. The building is empty. The letters jittered, tearing at the paper as I scrawled them. That night, I didn't wait inside. I sat crouched in the hedges again, hidden in shadow, staring at the street. My heart pounded with every second that dragged closer to one. When the knock came, it wasn't at a door down the block. It wasn't next door. It was mine. Again. 3 raps, hard and steady, rattling through the dresser inside. I pressed myself deeper into the hedges, eyes wide, unable to look away. The knob turned once. The dresser groaned as it slid another inch across the floor. And then, through the thin line of light beneath the door, a shadow shifted, tall, indistinct, waiting. The shadow lingered beneath the door, stretched thin across the floorboards. My chest seized as I crouched in the hedges, every breath catching in my throat. The knob rattled once, twice, steady as a pulse. The knob rattled once more. The dresser scraped against the wood, dragged another inch across the floor. 3 sharp knocks shook the door. The voice slipped inside me, calm, patient. How many live here? My name followed, hollow and cold, cutting through bone. I pressed myself flat against the wall. Notebook crumpled in my fists. My lips trembled against my palm. My lungs heaved, every muscle screaming to break. How many live here? The question pulsed again, louder this time, reverberating inside my skull until spots swam in my vision. The dresser shuddered as though something pressed harder from the other side. The wood creaked. The air thickened, suffocating, bending the walls inward until shadows stretched long and thin across the floor. I bit down on my tongue until blood ran down my throat, gagging on the taste. I didn't answer. The silence stretched. My heart hammered against my ribs, the sound deafening in the stillness. Then the pressure shifted. Not away, just sideways. The air lightened in front of me, but the weight of it slammed through the walls, through the ceiling. A door upstairs opened with a slow groan. My blood turned to ice. I staggered to my feet, lurching into the hallway, notebook still clutched tight. My legs buckled beneath me as I climbed the stairs, one hand dragging along the rail. The hall above was dark, doors shut, except one. The door at the far end stood wide. Inside, the rooms were bare, no furniture, no photographs, no trace of life. And in the center of the floor, the bed frame sat stripped clean. It was my father's apartment. I stumbled into the doorway, chest heaving, bile burning in my throat. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The silence pressed back against me, heavier than stone. He was gone. The memories ripped through me. His voice in the garage, oiling the shotgun, warning me not to ask. His sharp eyes across the kitchen table, telling me to keep my head down. The sound of his cough in the morning, the way he muttered at the evening news. I clutched the notebook tighter, sinking to my knees, tears burning down my face. He was gone, and no one else would remember. By morning, the neighbors smiled at me in the hallway as though nothing had changed. The unit door stood wide open, empty, already stripped of any signs someone had lived there. The landlord taped a slip of paper across the frame. Available. I staggered back inside my apartment, shaking so violently I could barely keep the pen in my hand. The notebook lay open on the table, pages filled with frantic scrawl. I forced myself to write slow, deliberate, clear letters across the final page. March 22. He came again. I didn't answer. My father was taken instead. My hand cramped as I pressed harder, gouging the paper. He keeps the balance. Every decade, one from each home. Always one. Never more. Never less. He trims us down until we fit. The letters swam as tears blurred my vision. I dropped the pen, clutching the book to my chest, rocking in the silent apartment. The walls pressed close. The silence thickened. But the truth was written, heavy and final. I was still here, but my father wasn't, and I knew the census taker would return when the next cycle came.